I wasn't thinking that in asking for majesty this week, that might have signaled that Bob and Sally are going to be away for a few weeks. But I wanted to make sure I got that in before they head on. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And we one traveled long ice-filled, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Robert Frost begins maybe his best-known poem, The Road Not Taken, with a dilemma. We come to places in our lives where we have to make choices. If only we could look ahead and see how each would turn out. The traveler in Frost's poems wishes he could take both paths at once. Yet choose he must, and he chooses the path least traveled, and it makes all the difference. 5 years ago, on January 11th, 2015, I began my first message as your interim pastor with almost these same words. Reverend Lilly had retired after 15 years as your pastor. You had formed a search committee and were looking to hire a permanent part-time pastor. You had hired another interim pastor before me who didn't stay very long. You were probably wondering, what does the future hold for our church? And then Julie and I showed up. I said that day that we stand at a crossroads, referring to the words that the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah spoke to the Israelites who were living in exile in Babylon. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. I went on to suggest that we needed to make choices, that we had to choose a direction. We had to ask God if He has a plan and purpose for us, and could we know it? Which way is the good way? It's surprising to think that 5 years have passed since I became your pastor. Much has happened. We've made choices. We've made changes. And yet, as I stand here today, right now, I believe we also stand at another crossroads and are wondering again, what does the future hold for our church? Especially as we embark on our 201st year. We have choices to make. Significant choices. And like the traveler in Frost's poem, we must make them. And our choices will make all the difference. So today, as I did 5 years ago, I want to speak to you again from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. You recognize these as the verses that I opened our worship service with, but I want to read them to you again. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Jesus, in this opening line, is speaking specifically to the weary and burdened. The weary are those people who are working hard. They're trying to make something of themselves. They're trying to earn enough money so their families don't have to worry where their next meal is coming from, so they can pay their rent and their mortgage. If they hitch their wagon to the right person or movement, perhaps they can move up in life. They're working hard. They're trying to make it happen. The burdened are those to whom it's happening. They drift from one thing to the next, from one job to the next, from one city to the next, from one relationship to the next, just hoping that one of these times something good will happen, that something will work out. Sometimes they sit and watch as the world passes them by. Sometimes the burden turns into the weary, and sometimes the weary turn into the burden. And sometimes they are the same people. Both struggle with making choices. Who should they listen to? From whom should they seek advice? Who should they follow? To whom should they hitch their wagon? Frederick Strickland arrived at the Crawford Inn in October of 1849 and announced that he wanted to climb Mount Washington. He was advised that the season for climbing had passed and that there was a serious storm threat. Strickland, though, according to Nicholas Howe, who writes, in Not Without Peril, 150 Years of Misadventures in the Presidential Range, came from a time and culture that believed man could do anything, and he insisted on climbing. The next morning, a search party found his dead body lying in a pool of water without his overcoat and gloves and without his pants. There are approximately 470,000 heart bypass surgeries per year in the United States. And after nearly every one, the patient is advised that they have to change their lifestyle, that they have to adjust their diet, and perhaps exercise more. Nevertheless, surveys show that 50% of these patients still continue to live the same lifestyle they did before surgery. Change is so difficult for them that they pick a lifestyle of death over life. Strickland was trying to make it happen. 50% of heart bypass patients let it happen. The weary and burdened are stressed and anxious about the future. They're looking for hope in a better way. Our congregation was looking for hope in a better way when we agreed June 26, 2015 to do a church health checkup, to take our congregation's pulse, to listen to our heartbeat, to check our blood pressure, to see if we were a healthy church, to ask if we needed to change our diet or exercise more. We were looking to make it happen. So a committee was appointed, and they began their examination September 1st, 2015. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." My paraphrase, "Come to me, and I will show you a better way, the good way." Today, again, we stand at a crossroads. We have choices to make. Let us choose the good way and walk in it. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." A yoke has negative connotations, but when it's used correctly, it relieves the workload and the burden for the animal that is wearing it. It allows cattle and oxen who are yoked together to share the workload. A yoke keeps the team on course and productive. Now, there are different kinds of yokes. There's a neck yoke, which requires the cattle or oxen to push forward with their neck, shoulders, and chest. There's a head yoke, which is attached to the animal's horns and requires the oxen or cattle to lower their head and push forward, putting all of the weight on their head and horns. And there's a withers yoke, which is used on the Bos Indus cattle, which is that cattle that has the hump on its neck and shoulders. The withers yoke is placed before the hump and held in place with staves. Jesus is using yoke in this passage to describe a way of life, principles of life, a theology of life. It's a format from which we live our lives and make decisions and choices. And everyone wears a yoke, whether they create their own or they adopt one from somewhere or someone else. The weary and burdened to whom Jesus is speaking were exposed to several different kinds of yokes that were constructed by the wise and learned, as Jesus refers to them earlier in verse 25. These included the Pharisees, whose yoke was the law and the oral tradition from which they had devised a system of 613 laws. They included the scribes, who interpreted the scriptures but differed from the Pharisees in that they rejected the oral traditions. There were the Sadducees, who were the priests and the aristocrats, who were mostly interested in keeping their power and position in society. There were the Essenes, who withdrew into their own secluded community. And then there were the Romans, who, of course, ruled over all of them. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," he's referring to his teaching and his example of life, of being faithful to the purpose and mission God has placed before you. So the health committee set out to see if we were being faithful to our call and mission. The committee conducted 31 interviews by email or phone or in person. They asked church committee members to fill out a leadership survey. They reviewed the survey that the Pastoral Relations Committee had conducted among the congregation, asking what you wanted in a pastor. They purchased a demographic study of Stratford and the surrounding area. And they also studied common reason churches stagnate or decline. And they took all this information and analyzed it and identified strengths to build on, and also made recommendations for improvements, which included a structure that allows our congregation to function and make decisions and choices. Jesus says, "Come to me, take my yoke upon you, and I will give you rest." Paraphrase, "Come, be my disciples, put on my yoke." Jesus' yoke is the good way. We stand at a crossroads, and we have to choose which direction we're going to take. Let's pray that we choose the good way and walk in it. Jesus says, "Come to me and take my yoke upon you, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus here is comparing himself to the wise and learned. Jesus is gentle. He's not motivated by self-importance or self-interest. The Greek word translated gentle doesn't mean weakness, like our English word gentle does. It means that Jesus doesn't have to be pushy or aggressive because he has the entire resources of God at his command. Jesus is humble. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. Jesus is a servant. Today, we have our own versions of the wise and learned, the people who want us to follow them and be their disciples. Like the wise and learned in Jesus' day, they want power. The Federal Election Commission reports that over $4.2 billion were spent on the 2018 midterm elections. That's $4.2 billion spent mostly on negative advertising. $4.2 billion spent so that Republicans can reject every idea Democrats have, and so Democrats can refuse to listen to anything Republicans say. Candidates who say that they are appealing to the intelligent voters are really appealing to those who have already decided to vote for them. The wise and learned want wealth. Manufacturers and retailers bombard us with advertisements trying to convince us to buy their products. They're everywhere. They pop up on your cell phone, on Facebook, on Google. Now they're inserting them into the corners of our TV screen, scrolling across the bottom as we're watching a program. You tune into a sporting event, and they're plastered all over the stadium walls, and even now they're painted on the playing surface. The wise and learned want fame. We live in a culture, a society that has this cult of celebrity. Everyone wants to know who's walking the red carpet, who's wearing, or what the movie stars or music stars, who they're wearing, not what they're wearing. Pew Research Center claims that by a wide margin, the top priorities of people between the ages of 18 and 25 is wealth and personal fame. Like the wise and learned, they're self-absorbed. A congressman once said to the newspaper editor Horace Greeley, "I'm a self-made man." To which Greeley answered, "Well, that relieves the Almighty of a great burden." The husband who claims he's never made a mistake has a wife who did. When Jesus promises that we will have relief for our souls, he's speaking holistically. The Greek word that is translated soul actually refers to the whole person, to their physical, spiritual, and mental well-being. If we wear Jesus' yoke, we will be relieved of some of the stress and the anxiety of decisions and choices, and worry about the past and the present. The Health Committee recommendations were essentially a recommendation to put on Jesus' yoke. And as a result, our congregation decided to clarify our purpose statement. which answers why we exist as a church. To adopt a new mission statement, which answers the question who we are as a congregation. Wrote a vision statement, which answers the question how we achieve our purpose and mission. We revised our bylaws. We established a church council and a decision-making structure, and you decided to hire a full-time pastor. Jesus says, "Come to me and you will find rest for your souls." Paraphrase, "Wear my yoke, and you have no need to be anxious or worried about decisions for the present or the future." Once again, we stand at a crossroads, and we must choose which direction we will go in from here. Let's decide to take the good way and walk in it. Jesus says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Dr. Drew Conroy, who is a professor of applied science at the University of New Hampshire, warns that the style and fit of a yoke cannot be overestimated. If it doesn't fit, if it doesn't take into consideration the fit of the animal's neck and shoulders and head, it will cause sores and actually create a burden for the animal. Jesus, growing up learning to be a carpenter from his earthly father, Joseph, no doubt learned the art of crafting a yoke. An easy yoke, he knew, was a carefully crafted yoke, that it showed consideration for the well-being of the person wearing it, that if it was comfortable and fit well, it would relieve burden. Jesus' yoke eases the burden of anxiety and stress about decisions and choices, about the future and the present. Jesus' yoke brings a new perspective. Where one person sees obstacles, another sees opportunities. Where the Israelites believed that Goliath was too big to attack, David believed he was too big to miss. There was a shoe salesman who went to Africa and wired back to his manufacturer, "No one wears shoes in this part of Africa. I'm coming home." The manufacturer sent another salesperson who sent back order after order. He wrote home, "Everyone here needs shoes." We have a pastor friend who filled in one Sunday at a church that was paralyzed by apathy. After the worship service, a couple took him to lunch, and he asked, "What happened?" And they answered, "Well, when our congregation came to the Jordan River, we refused to cross." Jesus' yoke fits all cultures: Latino, Asian, African, European. Jesus' yoke fits all social structures: wealthy, middle class, the poor, including the 3 billion people around the world who live on $2.50 a day. Jesus' yoke fits all sizes of churches, from mega churches to house churches, to churches that meet secretly in the middle of the night in places like Iran and China and North Korea. Jesus' yoke is carefully crafted so it fits everyone. And everyone who wears Jesus' yoke are yoke fellows. Yoke fellows who are mismatched simply work against one another, resulting in less or nothing being accomplished. Mismatched yoke fellows result in one of the pair doing the bulk of the work, bearing the bulk of the burden. Jesus matches yoke fellows according to their gifts and skills so they will actually pull together. The Health Committee also made some discoveries and recommendations that still need action. Among them include exploring alternative styles and times for worship, more community outreach, more fellowship opportunities. Jesus says, "Come to me and take my yoke upon you, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Paraphrase, my yoke makes change easy and removes the burden and worry about decisions and choices in the present and the future. Once again, we stand at a crossroads, It's time to choose which direction we will take. It's time to complete the final phase of the Health Committee, which was step 4, to develop a strategic plan that will guide our ministry for years to come. By God's grace and His help, we have accomplished much. We've made good decisions. We've made some changes. But are we there yet? Are we finished? Are we all wearing Jesus' yoke and pulling together as yoke fellows? Years from now, whether it's in a year or 5 or 10 or more, I hope you're like me and you don't want to be sitting at a table after a dinner and have to say, well, when our congregation came to this Jordan River, we refused to cross. In fact, may I be so bold as to suggest that right now we are standing on the banks of our Jordan River, and our choice is, are we going to cross or not? Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is the good way. Let's choose the good way and walk in it.